In this video, we're going to take a detailed walkthrough of the various folders and files that collectively make up an Android app project. So let's get into that. Okay, so I'm going to start up Eclipse. And we're going to actually look at the most recent project we've created, which is our My First App project we've created in the previous section. So first things first, I'm going to wait until the project has had a chance to rebuild. You can see that it's done that. And now we're going to click this little arrow and we're going to start going through some of these folders to get a little bit of a better understanding of what's involved in the project. So firstly, let's start in the source folder. SRC stands for source. And this is where all your Java code effectively will go. Now you can see that there's our package, our example package name that we defined, org.example.myfirstapp, and you can see mainActivity.java. You can double click that. What we might do is just go back to the Java perspective so we can see things a little bit more clearly. And you can see this is some basic Java code. This is, in fact, is the Java code that is executed by default when we start the app. Now I just want to again look at that, show you this from a file on disk point of view so you can understand the structure involved. So I'm going to go back to my Finder and I'm going to go to my developer folder, going into my workspace, My First App, and we're going to go into the source folder. Now you can see what's happened here is the way that Java works. This is not just Eclipse, but this is Java. The package name, each element of the package name has got its own subfolder. So it's org, example, my first app, and that's where the actual Java file is. So you'll find that that directly equates to the folder structure. So I'm going to my first app. This might show you it a little bit better. You can sort of see here how it's source, subfolder org, subfolder of that directory is example, and then another subfolder for my first app, and that's where the main activity.java file is. Now we could actually edit this file direct. Even though Eclipse is actually looking after the files, if we go back here, for example, we'll just have to have a look at it. We can see that there's nothing at the top here. But if we go back to Finder, if we right click this, open this with a Mac text editor, we can put in a test comment. We'll save that. If we go back to Eclipse, we notice now we went back to it, it come up and said the file has been modified. Do you want to replace the content? So we could say yes, and we can see that this is a test has come up on the screen. So do keep in mind that to a large degree, all Eclipse is doing is making it easier for you to modify all these files. In the past, without having an editor like this, like Eclipse, all this entire structure, going back here actually, all these files you would have had to maintain and folders and figure out for yourself. And I did a lot of Java development in the past without an editor, and I can tell you that having an interactive development environment like Eclipse does save you a heck of a lot of time because it does a lot of things for you automatically. So just in line with that, we talked about the source folder. The gen folder, you can see that it makes it pretty clear that this is generated Java files. You would ordinarily never need to go into here. All the files in here are actually created automatically. In actual fact, there's one file in here, r.java. Every time you add a resource like a graphic or something else, this gets regenerated by the system. And it's got all these different settings. Now these equate to files that we've actually got in the system. For example, the IC launcher is the icon that we created in a previous video. So this all equates back to files that are actually used in the system. And so basically you can ignore the gen folder completely because it's all generated as the project is actually built from scratch. But those references do actually come back here and reference the RES, which stands for the resource folder. Now this also is basically pretty much generated to a large degree by the system. For example, if we have a look at the drawable folders, you can see there's drawable dash, HDPI, LDPI, etc. These are various sort of dimensions, if you will, for want of a better term, to support different devices. And if we have a look in there, there's usually just got the one file, IC launcher, another one, IC launcher. So if we go back and have a look at those files, double click them, and no surprises there, it's actually our image. But what I want to show you is just going back into that structure again. we'll go back up here into the workspace. I just want to show you how they look. So we open the first one up. We can see that the dimension is 72 by 72. If we go into another folder, dimensions 48 by 48. And we still go into another folder, dimensions 144 by 144. Now that's the width and height of the image. So what's happening is, and you can see like quite easily on the screen there if you have a look, there's 3 different size images that are shown there. So essentially different Android devices run at different resolutions. So when you create an app, you need to create the graphics, or at least some of the graphics that support those different sizes and different graphic widths and heights essentially. So that's what this process is here. This launcher file is our icon file, and it's been created to support various devices. So that was actually done automatically. Okay, so we'll just go back. So that's the drawable folders. We'll come back to the other ones shortly, but just continuing on our journey at the top. So source and gen we've talked about. Android 5, now if we expand this out, this will equate to our version, our Android SDK. And if I expand it out, you can see exactly. It's the Android Developer Tools Bundled SDK Platforms Android 21. So that was literally the version of Android that we selected in the project settings. And just to see how that works, we can click on the project and go into Project Properties. We can click on Android, and again we've selected Android, but just to be different, let's take the tick off that, and we're going to actually select the Google APIs this time. Click Apply and click OK. And you can see already something's changed here. There's now additional files that have been added automatically. Now these are the extra files for the Google APIs add-on. So you can see this is the point I want to make about Eclipse. If you were doing this without having an environment like Eclipse, you would be having to make these changes yourself manually. You'd be having to sort of go into the right directories and copy these files. So that's what Eclipse is doing for you. It's automating a lot of that. And to see any major changes, what you normally do is go into the project folder and clean. So it's something that you'll do sort of fairly often whenever you get yourself into a situation where you're not sure what's going on. You can click on clean, and that will literally reload and recreate the folders. So just to show you, in fact, what's going on here, we could actually go into the gen folder, and I could actually delete everything in that gen folder. And you can see what happened. Immediately it was recreated. You can see down here in the error message, r.java was removed, recreating r.java. r.java is that important resource file that we talked about previously. Now, so can you see what happened there? Effectively, the Eclipse interactive development environment figured out that something was removed and it recreated it. So effectively, it's running as a service, and it's constantly checking those files, in those particular folders to see whether they're out of date, and it will update them automatically for you. Okay, so that's the gen folder. So that was the SDK, I should say, and also the gen. So we'll close that. So we'll go back to project again. So I'll select my project properties. And I'm going to deselect Google API and just select the regular Android one again. And you can see instantly there in the project, the Android SDK, it's now reverted back to the original. Moving down the list, Android private libraries. Now that's an Android support file. Now this file supports what actually emulates modern features of Android apps on older versions. Now you may or may not need this file depending on which version of the SDK you're targeting, but again, this is something that is managed by the Eclipse interactive development environment, the IDE. It does that for you. Okay, assets. Now this is a folder that you will be updating if you want to include graphics or some other sorts of files, perhaps sound files and those types of things. You'll put them into this assets folder, and then automatically Eclipse will include those in the project itself. Your final application you create will include those. Now the bin folder is very much like the gen folder. That's also managed by the system, and the entire contents are created and updated as required. So at any time you can recreate this entire directory by going into the project clean like I showed you before. Libs folder, we'll close the bin one down. This is an area, and you can see that the Android support library is copied here automatically. If you've got third-party libraries, this is the place to put them in. And for example, if there's a specific bit of functionality that you want to take from another library, another Java library or another Android library, that's not part of the standard Android SDK, this is where you'd put it in. Now the RES folder, or the resources folder, has got very important files that are used in the actual application. We talked about the launcher files, so you'll find there'll be other graphics in there depending on the graphics that are in your app. And as we create ever more complicated apps, you'll be able to see this in operation. But there's also other folders. You can see that there's a layout folder, there's a menu folder, and there's a values folder. Now these are all XML files, which essentially are just text files, basic text files free of any real formatting, that control elements of the Android app. The files in the layout subfolder control the layout of app screens in the app itself. Now we can open one up just to see. And one of the great things that, again, you'll find that Eclipse does, it draws a graphical representation of that file. Because this is the raw file itself, and you can see that it's got really basic information. And over time we'll be going through some of this in more detail so you can really make sense as to what this is. But that's the text version, the basic sort of low-level version of the file, and this here is a graphic representation of that file. So this is a good way for you to sort of check out and see how a particular app will work. And later in the course we're going to be using this to drag and drop resources into this particular area here, and as we do that we'll be finding that this file will be updated automatically. So basically anything to do with screen design and so forth is going to be in the layout folder. Menu folder, if I double click on that, that is the menu that's in the actual application. Now the application that we've created has actually got a settings settings menu that I've never actually gone into and shown you before. It's pretty basic. It really is just a one little section where you can click on a settings button, and it doesn't actually do anything by default. If we click on the XML, we can see there that it actually shows you there. It sort of says show us action never, so it's never going to be shown anyway. But my point is, again, much the same as with the layout. Any menus that you've got in your system are going to be in here. And again, we'll be updating this as we go through the course. Lastly, the values subfolder has got various strings and so forth, which we'll be talking about more as we get it into more complicated apps. But if we go into strings as one example, these things here can be changed at runtime, and then the actual Java code can read this and use the data that's in those files. So again, the graphical version, click on the more XML version. So you could change that. You can see how that's been updated automatically. And if you recall the Hello World settings, these are actually the data or the things that are shown on the screen. So you could change those here, and we'll be doing that in future apps, and the changes you make here will be reflected within the app itself. So that's the RES folder. There's other files in there that we'll be talking more about later. And the Android manifest.xml, we've got a separate video going into detail on that. Essentially, you can think of that sort of the probably one of, if not the most important files in an Android project, because essentially it controls everything. It's everything to do with a package, with a Android application. The package name, the version name, and it's got all these other things that are built into it. And if we just quickly open up the file, you'll see it looks probably looks a little bit like mumbo jumbo to you if you haven't used it before. But as you sit back and look at it and study it, you'll see some things that will start becoming more familiar to you. Like, for example, the package. We've talked about the package before. The minimum SDK version. We talked about that before when we were building the application. The targeted SDK version. So you're probably starting to get an idea that you've got different ways to update an app. You can go in and update the raw XML. You can go in here and literally change that to a different number if you want to. But we won't be doing too much more with the Android manifest file. Now there's a separate video where I'm going to go into that into more detail. So really, just the purpose of this video is to give you a bit of a walkthrough of how it looks in Eclipse. And again, if we go back through into our Finder, we can see that pretty well it's mirroring what we've seen in an Eclipse. Get a source folder, which we've talked about before, the RES folder, the libs folder, the generation folder, the folder that's the generated files, classes and so forth, binary folder, assets, and that's the Android.xml. So essentially, that's what Eclipse is doing again, just to confirm, it's it's built this structure for us, and this structure is used by pretty well all Android apps. And once it's built, every time we make a change within the interface, using the Eclipse IDE, it will be updating the relevant files. So it's probably going to be really quite useful for you to make sure you understand, at a reasonable level, the relationship between these files and where they are and where they're physically stored in a folder. And it really makes it easier when you're opening other folders, because other projects, I should say, because you'll be able to use this base knowledge to start sort of looking into it in a little bit more detail, to figuring out how the application has been put together. All right, so I'm going to end this walkthrough video there. Let's move on to the next video.